I'll start.
In 1988, the producer of Tales from the Dark Side, Richard P. Rubinstein, delivered another helping of TV horror in the form of Monsters. The series would go on to run for 3 seasons, proving horror fans still had an appetite for creepy, twisted anthologies. Unlike its predecessor, Monsters fully embraced a Monster of the Week format. Nearly every episode featured some kind of unique monstrosity, ghoul, or whatever this thing is. Although the series was only given a shoestring budget, Monsters still managed to pull off memorable visuals thanks to acclaimed makeup artist Dick Smith, the show's special effects consultant. Smith is famous for his work on films such as The Exorcist and Scanners, and it's clear from the sheer number of monsters on display, this was a show that understood the assignment. Even the opening featured a suburban family of monsters settling in to watch the show itself. Throughout its run, Monsters offered up a variety of nightmarish tales, and naturally we all have our top picks. That said, here are 10 of my favorite episodes of Monsters.
They could cure the fevers when nothing else would work. The fever men have been around for hundreds of years, maybe thousands.
Let's start with the pilot episode, The Fever Man. This strange story explores science versus superstition versus a giant, sickly blob of disease. But we'll get to that in a minute.
Is this the house of the Fever Man?
Up front, we meet a struggling father named Mason, as played by John C. Venma, who takes his sick daughter to see a mysterious healer, as played by David McCallum. The question is, can this Fever Man actually get the job done?
Mason, don't do this. Don't let this trickster rob you.
Mason's friend, a skeptical doctor, played by Patrick Garner, sure as hell doesn't think so. He's convinced that the healer is a fraud, and their back and forth throughout is a highlight.
You are one of the most despicable things I have ever set eyes on.
Most people get to know me quite a bit before they reach that conclusion.
The Fever Man himself is an interesting player. He's fully committed to his craft as a healer, but sobriety isn't exactly part of his job description.
No, thank you.
Very unprofessional. Anyway, where the story takes off is with the revelation of how our Fever Man actually battles the sickness within his patients. It turns out he summons a physical manifestation of the illness into our world. He then proceeds to beat the living crap out of it. This is a bizarre concept to say the least, but it works perfectly within this Victorian setting. And seeing a protagonist throw down with a monster of some sort is a tradition in horror. We've seen characters go toe-to-toe with Freddy, Jason, and Art the Clown. These battles rarely work out, but there's something to be said for this ballsy approach. On that note, another aspect I enjoyed here was the practical effects. This festering manifestation of illness makes for a unique threat, and what this beast lacks in grace, he makes up for in greasy, fast speed. Next up on my list is an episode that veers further into dark comedy territory, The Farmer's Daughter. This one starred famed pie-in-the-face comedian and TV icon Soupy Sales.
You haven't been hit with one pie yet.
Well, that's because I haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, well, you haven't done anything right either.
Here, Sales portrays traveling salesman Howard Philby. On a stormy evening, Howard finds himself stranded at a farmhouse where he encounters an older couple willing to let him spend the night in their attic. The catch is, their daughter Lucy also happens to reside in the attic.
Well, Howard Philbean is nothing if he's not trustworthy.
With that, Lucy's mother strings up an old-school modesty sheet, and we're left to assume all will be well. Spoiler alert, all doesn't go well. It turns out cramming together this lonesome peddler and Lucy in the same room, and in the same bed, isn't the brightest idea. Interestingly, Lucy doesn't mind her new visitor.
You're one of them traveling salesmen, ain't you?
The firm of Peabody and Snodgrass, first in our field.
And as far as Howard goes, well, he jumps into the situation eagerly.
Well, let's get to it.
The hook here is that Lucy is clearly harboring a dark secret. Soon enough, we learn she isn't what she seems. And let's just say fans of body horror are in for a treat. Stephanie Phillips is great here as Lucy, a mysterious and seductive young woman who quickly becomes a rather menacing threat. As the tale plays out, it becomes clear Howard will either end up Lucy's next husband or her next victim.
You asked for her, you got her.
This episode works well because it maintains a lighter tone earlier on, luring you in. Then we shift into much darker territory. Ultimately, the farmer's daughter plays out like a joke with a sinister punchline just ahead, which is fitting because the premise of a traveling salesman who encounters a farmer's daughter has roots in humor which go pretty far back, and variations of the farmer's daughter type can be seen throughout the years in pop culture as well as comics. We see even more familiar types via Lucy's country parents.
I don't want to hear no more. Damn salesman.
But what makes this one worth a watch is the twisted spin on all of these tropes and the grim punchline you won't see coming. The next episode on my list, The Match Game, is back to basics horror.
I don't like this, Matthew. We're gonna get in trouble.
Would you relax?
4 young people meet up in a spooky, abandoned mansion in search of a good time. What sort of hijinks are these wacky kids up to? Well, they play a game where each person holds a lit match, and one at a time, they each tell a part of a ghost story. In this case, the storyline they tell is about the deceased former owner, Herbert Waverly, or as his name is pronounced in the episode, Herbert Waverly. Although they make up the story as they go along, Herbert is inadvertently conjured back to life. And when Zombie Herbert makes his grand entrance, the screaming, chasing, and killing begins. The most familiar face here is likely Tori Spelling of 90210 fame, who plays Beverly, one of the more fearful in the group. But for horror fans, this one is a treat. First up, we have Jody, as played by Ashley Lawrence, one of the stars of the original Hellraiser movies. Byron Thames, who plays Paul, showed up in Freddy's Nightmares. And lastly, we have Sasha Jensen, who plays Matthew. Jensen also appeared in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. You could say he got a break in both Halloween and Monsters. However, the real star here, at least in my view, is Zombie Herbert. This slimy, undead nightmare stalks our 4 young leads and makes for a grisly villain. Interestingly, Herbert was played by Tom Woodruff Jr. Woodruff is best known for his work in special effects, for which he actually won an Academy Award. In addition to his role here as a monstrous corpse, Woodruff actually has many other awesome monster credits to his name. He played the Gill Man in Monster Squad, he was the Pumpkinhead in Pumpkinhead, and he was the utility monster in the Tales from the Crypt episode Corman's Calamity, just to name a few. It's obvious why this episode is a fan favorite. It's a classic ghost story complete with an eerie atmosphere that evolves into a zombie slasher. What more can you ask for? Wait, what was that? You want more zombie action? Okay. My next pick, The Hole, is one of the more bloody and gore-filled entries in the series, and yes, it delivers even more zombies. Set during the Vietnam War, we follow 2 U.S. Marines, played by Ahmad Rashad, Anton Pagan, and their South Vietnamese guide, portrayed by Glenn Kubota. Tasked with recovering intelligence and interrogating surviving enemies, the trio descends into a maze of Viet Cong tunnels. But the only survivor they find is grotesquely mangled and rambling.
What'd he say?
We soon learn that when the tunnels were created, the Viet Cong dug too deep and apparently disturbed the burial grounds of fallen guerrilla soldiers.
The dead came out of the walls.
The what?
As any horror fan knows, when a cemetery is disturbed, the undead are sure to follow. With its claustrophobic setting and swarms of vicious zombies, The Hole definitely evokes the spirit of George Romero's classic zombie films. And what makes this scenario all the more horrific is that our protagonists are completely trapped, underground, and running in circles.
Don't you understand? Like the VC said, the tunnels won't let us escape.
Brace yourselves, because next up we have The Moving Finger. This one is based on a short story by Stephen King, and it may well be the weirdest episode in the show. Our lead here is Tom Noonan, who plays Howard Mittler, an offbeat guy who happens to be a huge fan of game shows.
And strangled all in
Rasputin.
Noonan is oddly likable here, and it's refreshing to see him as more of a protagonist, since he's mainly known for his villainous roles. His wife, Violet, as played by Alice Playton, is also great here. These two feel like some eccentric neighbors who were pretty much made for each other.
I like crazy flavors, Howard. That's why I married you.
Also, considering his height, as you can see from the way he towers over his wife, it makes sense that Noonan played Frankenstein's monster in the Monster Squad. Hey, look at that, we got a second Monster Squad connection. Anyway, one night Howard's wife heads out, but his alone time is interrupted when he hears a noise. Turns out the source of the noise is a ridiculously long, disgusting finger poking out of the drain of his bathroom sink. Unfortunately, Howard is pretty much on his own during this ordeal because his wife never seems to see the finger. Although she does spot some other major issues in the bathroom.
My God, Howie!
What?
Half the towels are on the floor. What's going on?
As the episode continues, Howard does his best to kill the moving finger. But getting rid of this nightmare is far more difficult than you'd expect.
This is my bathroom!
As Howard grows increasingly unhinged, he's left with no other option but to unleash hell. The moving finger is good old-fashioned horror comedy that just makes for a fun watch. And it offers up plenty of goofy, over-the-top insanity.
I've never seen anything like her. About 25 years of medicine.
Next up is another strange episode, The Cocoon. This one is a neo-noir style tale about a rather sleazy police detective played with perfection by Billy Drago. He's investigating the case of a mysterious woman who has been hospitalized after a car accident.
So the report said she didn't have any ID on her.
The detective has a psychic girlfriend, as played by Silvana Gallardo. Her cryptic visions are key to this story and keep us hooked. But the real wild card here is our seductive amnesiac, as played by Kim Ulrich. Although we know very little about her early on, one thing is for sure, she has money. And that's something our shady detective takes note of.
Sounds like exploitation to me.
Take me 10 years to earn what she'd pay.
But the intrigue here comes about in piecing together the motives of our mystery woman via flashbacks. It should come as no surprise, this being monsters, this woman may not even be human. Last I checked, not too many women wrap up their lovers in a silk cocoon. In all seriousness, The Cocoon is worth a watch for the moody atmosphere and the creepy mystery. I happen to love a good mystery myself, especially in anthologies because the standalone format ensures we'll get a resolution. And in this case, you can bet the resolution will be disturbing as hell. Next up, we have Pool Sharks. This one is about a slick pool hustler named Gabe, as played by Tom Mason. Gabe finds himself in a bizarre game of pool against yet another seductive monster's femme fatale named Natasha.
You want to play pool for my body. For me.
And because this is monsters, well, you know, someone here has to be a monster of some sort. So let's go ahead and play a quick monsters guessing game. Would you say one of these two characters are hiding fangs, claws, or tentacles? Time's up. If you guessed fangs, then congratulations. Early on, Natasha is revealed to be a vampire. Natasha, as played by Rebecca Kyla Downs, is the standout here and makes for an interesting antagonist.
I'm glad you feel that way.
She maintains a threatening vibe throughout, but she does so while heavily flirting and rattling off some pretty on-the-nose double entendres.
That money pool's just a stick and some balls.
That's what I like about it.
Oh, jeez.
Fortunately, there's chemistry between our two leads, and that's important because their cat and mouse dynamic is prominent. But another element that works here are the subtle hints of the characters' pasts, which are sprinkled throughout.
But how could a woman just make a man disappear if that's not exactly what this man wanted?
As these details come to light, their conflict becomes all the more engaging and leads us to a memorable conclusion.
What's so funny?
Don't hustle a hustler, Gabe.
Number 3 on my list is Reaper. This one stars George D. Wallace as Mr. Ross, a bitter old man stuck in a nursing home.
Now just take me to a room now. You hear? Get me out of here.
The only glimmer of hope in Ross's life is a kindly, optimistic nurse named Celia, as played by TV icon Barbara Billingsley.
Are you always this optimistic?
I try to rise to the occasion.
Billingsley is great here, which is no surprise. This is the woman who taught the Beeve life lessons and even spoke fluent jive in Airplane.
Just hang loose, blood. She's gonna catch up on the rebound on the med side.
So, dealing with Ross is just another day at the office. And as the episode plays out, their budding relationship becomes the heart of the story. However, the Reaper eventually does come for Ross, and as expected, he's terrified and refuses to go.
No!
Where things get interesting is when Ross strikes a deal with the Reaper, offering to deliver him more souls in exchange for sparing his life.
We have a deal.
As the story progresses, Ross's moral compass is tested, and he's forced to decide which of his fellow residents should live or die. Sci-fi fans will certainly remember Wallace from many notable roles throughout the years, and he also does well here. Granted, you can't quite root for him, but you can't blame him for his fear of death. Another standout here is the Reaper himself, brought to life by the highly regarded character actor Kurt Lowens. While in human form, Lowens is as menacing as ever, but he's even more nightmarish when he takes on the traditional shape of death, complete with the black robe, sickle, and creepy Skeletor face. What? And once again, despite the minimal budget, we get some chillin' practical effects, this time courtesy of Rick Lazzarini. This traditional incarnation of death is one of the more memorable takes we've seen on TV.
Please! I'll do anything!
On that note, this episode excels at playing on our primal fear of being dragged away by the Grim Reaper. And it also begs the morbid question, how far would you go to cheat death? The love triangles and relationships in previous entries on my list were weird enough. Then, an episode like Bughouse comes along and screams, "Hold my beer." Despite the title, Bughouse isn't the all-out invasion of creepy crawlers you might expect. This one leans more into surreal and visceral horror. And yes, there's still revolting bug imagery as well.
Bastards!
Our story opens with our lead, Ellen, crashing with her estranged sister May in her broken-down cabin. Off the bat, you can tell these two have a ton of emotional baggage, and things are further complicated by the fact that Ellen's sister is pregnant and she has a mysterious new lover who has moved in with her. Enter Peter, as played by Robert Kerbick. He's easily one of the more creepy and manipulative antagonists in the series. And right up front, it's made clear just how intense his relationship is with May. As events play out, we learn Peter has a lot more love to give to May's sister, and he clearly isn't what he seems.
You are just like your sister.
No, I'm not.
She didn't believe me either. I had to show her too.
Show her what?
Bughouse has a lot going for it. There's a sense of dread and tension throughout due to May's pregnancy. Whatever the hell is writhing around inside of her obviously is a nightmare waiting to happen. But the production value here is also a step above the rest. The atmosphere is dreary, and the dilapidated cabin serves as the perfect backdrop for this eerie tale. Lastly, the performances are also excellent. Karen Sillis and Julia Kurth bring depth and tension via their strained relationship.
It's my life, not yours.
Credit where it's due, Bughouse ditches the somewhat campy tone of other episodes in favor of playing it straight. A wise choice considering Bughouse ultimately goes to some very dark places. Now, before we move on to my number one favorite episode of Monsters, let's show some love to 5 honorable mentions from the series.
Oh my god. Look out!
In cases of sleep deprivation, hallucinations can be very common.
This is home.
You hear every breath I take, the sounds I make. Do I snore?
And finally, my number one pick, Mannequins of Horror. This is Monsters in top form, offering up genuine chills, creepy stop motion, and it's one of the most cerebral entries in the series.
I was about to implant their brains. I've only been successful with one so far.
William Prince stars as Dr. Colin, a once renowned surgeon who is now confined in an asylum after suffering a mental breakdown. The true hook here is in Dr. Colin's obsession with meticulously crafted clay mannequins.
Observe the detail. It is anatomically perfect.
Intriguingly, these little figures are seemingly capable of moving on their own, and they clearly share a connection with their creator. The dystopian world this episode presents is also noteworthy. Just enough is revealed to suggest that life outside the asylum is as bleak as it is inside. The sinister face of this oppressive society is Dr. Starr, as played very well by Brian Brophy.
I believe with my help you could still become a useful and very productive member of our new society.
The conflict between Colin and Starr drives this story, with Starr serving as our smug, self-serving antagonist. The only ally Dr. Colin has here, who isn't made of clay, is the kind-hearted Dr. Jarrus, as played by Glynis Barber.
This one almost looks like...
Despite a few awkward moments, their relationship feels genuine, and she's the only person here who values him as a human being.
Dr. Starr. That man saved hundreds of lives during the war. He's a brilliant surgeon.
He was.
Interestingly, Mannequins of Horror was based on a short story by the author of Psycho, Robert Bloch. And if this type of story is up your alley, then there's yet another adaptation worth checking out, the 1972 British horror anthology, Asylum. And you can bet in that film, we also get some pretty unique little figures as well.
Quiet! There will be no talking.
In short, Mannequins of Horror is Monsters at its best. A fan favorite that features compelling performances and delivers one of the most thought-provoking and disturbing entries in the series. There we have it, my top 10 favorite episodes of Monsters. If you happen to be a fan of anthology shows, then Monsters was likely a staple of your late-night TV viewing. That said, feel free to let me know your favorite Monsters episode below, or your favorite monster from the show. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, take care, be well, and remember to brush your teeth after eating your candy critters. Later.